Caesar Augustus was the first emperor of Rome, but when it came to food, he was a man of simple tastes. Rather than indulging in the lavish feasts enjoyed by later Roman emperors, he preferred a simple diet of bread, fish, figs, and fresh cheese, like this 2,000-year-old recipe which is for a predecessor of mozzarella.
Ooh, predecessor of mozzarella. Well, you know what? I have to agree with the based emperor once again, because in the evening, if it's like 6:30, starting to get a little hungry, you give me fresh bread, buffalo mozzarella, mixed olives, and a little bit of sun-dried tomatoes. Mamma mia.
So thank you to Sid Meier's Civilization 7 for sponsoring this video as we dine like the Emperor Augustus, this time on Tasting History.
Man, that's awesome. He got sponsored by Civilization 7 with Augustus? Man, that's awesome. I actually tried the game and I played as Augustus. Link in the description.
It is no secret that I love history. However, did you know I also enjoy video games? In fact, I have spent much of the last 2 decades of my life playing Sid Meier's Civilization. I started back in college with Civilization 3, and now I'm going to be playing Civilization 7 because...
Wait, I gotta do this, Max. I mean, Maximus Miller. I like you, okay? But I gotta do this. That's when I started. You started with 3? CD-ROM? Man. How about that, medium? If you want to watch me play all of these games, retro and modern, subscribe to my gaming channel, shameless plug, link in the description.
First Emperor of Rome. He is one of the many leaders that you can play as in the game, and I thought he was kind of perfect to do a video on, because while he was one of the greatest leaders that Rome ever produced, when it came to eating, he was kind of plebeian in his habits. The ancient biographer Suetonius wrote that he was a light eater, for I would not omit even this detail, and, as a rule, preferred the food of the common people, particularly the coarse sort of bread, small fishes, fresh, moist hand-pressed cheese, and green figs of the second crop. And he would not wait for dinner, for he ate wherever and whenever he felt hungry. A man after my own heart. Not so much the coarse bread part, but the eating whenever I'm hungry part. So with this description in mind, I thought that I would recreate one of the foods that Suetonius mentions, the cheese. Cheese should be made of pure milk.
So interesting. He has a reproduction of the Augustus of Prima Porta, the one that you can find now at the Vatican. And interestingly enough, the original, first of all, I think it would be great if you have someone paint it for accuracy. Max, it would look spectacular. And also, if you really want to hit it, the arm is not period. It fell off and then it was replaced a few times. The original was holding a spear, and the spear tip to the ground. Do that and you'll have the most historically accurate representation of Augustus of Prima Porta. You're welcome.
Which is as fresh as possible. It should usually be curdled with rennet obtained from a lamb or a kid, and equally well with fresh sap from a fig tree. The least amount of rennet that a pail of milk requires weighs a silver denarius. It is sprinkled with pounded salt. Some crush green pine nuts and mix them with the milk and curdle it in this way. The method of making what we call hand-pressed cheese is the best known of all. When the milk is slightly congealed in the pail and still warm, it is broken up and hot water is poured over it, and then it is shaped by hand. So the process, especially the part about putting it into hot water and then forming it by hand, is very similar to how modern mozzarella is made today. Now, they're not the same. The word mozzarella didn't even come around until the 16th century, and most mozzarella, at least in Italy, is made from buffalo milk, which they did not have in Italy in the ancient Roman Empire, but it's definitely a predecessor of mozzarella. So for this recipe...
I do have to clarify that. I do not believe... No, so the best quality mozzarella in Italy is made with buffalo milk, but that's specific to the region of Campania. The majority of mozzarella is milk-based, like cow milk-based, and in Campania they have a word for it, and they say fior di latte, which means flower of milk, but in general, in all other regions, it's the other way around. You have to specify buffalo mozzarella, mozzarella di bufala. If you just say mozzarella in other regions of Italy, generally you refer to cow's milk.
What you'll need is a half gallon or 2 liters of whole milk. Now this milk can be from a sheep or a cow or a goat. I'm using cow milk because that was what was available. And it can be pasteurized, but it cannot be ultra pasteurized. That process does weird things that make it so it doesn't make cheese as well. It also can't be homogenized, same reason. So you might have to search, especially here in the States, for just pasteurized, non-homogenized milk. It's usually called like cream top milk or something like that. Then an 1/8 teaspoon of rennet diluted into 2 tablespoons of water. And you can use animal or vegetable rennet. He mentions both. Animal rennet usually comes from the stomach of an unweaned young animal like a cow or a kid, which is a goat or a lamb. But he also mentions different forms of what are essentially vegetable rennets made from fig sap, but he also mentions safflower oil and some other things. So either one works. Then you also need a tablespoon of sea salt and a half cup of pine nuts. So why pine nuts, you ask? I'm not entirely sure. I have a theory though. So when you're making most modern cheeses, you use some sort of acid to acidify the milk. When it comes to mozzarella, that's usually citric acid. They did not have that in ancient Rome.
Could they not use lemons?
They have vinegar and other things that you could use, but it turns out that pine nuts will do the same thing. I'm just not exactly sure how much it's going to need, so we're just going to test it out. So it is going to be different again than mozzarella today because the citric acid is what gives it kind of that stretchiness.
Yeah.
This doesn't have that. So first take the pine nuts and lightly crush them and put them into a large pot and then pour the milk over them. I let it sit for about 20 minutes to let the pine nuts do what I think is their thing, and then I removed any pine nut pieces floating on the top.
Ooh.
At this point, you set the pot over medium heat and stirring, bring the temperature up to about 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 Celsius. Then take it off the heat and add the rennet. Now you want to make sure that the rennet gets fully incorporated, but you don't want to stir too much because as soon as you add it, curds will start to form and you don't want to break them up. So very gently stir it in, and then once it's incorporated, cover it and leave it. Now if you are using citric acid or vinegar, it only takes about 10 to 12 minutes for the curds to fully separate from the whey. I did not have that happen. It took about 25 minutes, and even then the curds were not as smooth as most modern versions, but they did separate enough that I was able to cut them into about 1-inch squares. Really, the curds were sort of between a farmer's cheese.
This is really fascinating to imagine how the ancients must have tried. Like, first of all, who invented it first? I imagine some kind of tribal, really probably like Stone Age people. If I had to guess, I think because you don't need metal to do this. So unless evidence points that way, I think it's something that happened before the Copper Age. It's once again one of those fascinating things that maybe happened on accident. Oftentimes a lot of discoveries, but not only when it comes to culinary recipes and inventions, but in general, a lot of things happen by accident. And I can definitely see this happening, like someone mixing something or dropping something in the mix, still think, oh yeah, I won't throw it away though, because you don't want to throw away anything if you are a hunter-gatherer population or even early farmers, if this is in the Neolithic period. And then once you open it and you see this, what I would think is like, oh, I'm not touching that. But no, some of the ancient people must have been very willing to risk a little bit, wanted to explore, wanted to figure things out. And so maybe they did this. They cut it in pieces, and then let's see how the process continues. But I mean...
And a mozzarella. Once they're cut up, then again very gently stir them around in the whey and let them sit for another 5 minutes while the curds fall to the bottom. Then we need to separate the curds and whey.
And the
so
liquid,
gently drain the whey through a strainer until you have just the curds left. Then add in the salt and work that into the curds. Columella says this will help draw out more whey.
Yeah.
And let the curds sit.
Makes sense, because of course the salt is going to push out the liquids, the water.
Sit for another few minutes while you heat a pot of water to about 170 degrees Fahrenheit or 75 degrees Celsius. And once it's hot, pour it onto the curds just enough to cover them. Gently stir the curds around in the hot water, and the water is going to be quite hot, so you can use gloves or a spoon if need be. And the curds should...
He doesn't, because he's a pro.
Start to melt together. Now, the amount of liquid you keep in the cheese is really up to you,
Yeah.
but the more you squeeze, the firmer the cheese will be. And as you shape it, if it starts to get too
That kind of looks like a mozzarella already a little bit. So I'm wondering, of course, he says it's not going to have the stringy quality, but then again, the level of stringiness depends on how much you can stretch a mozzarella and how much, if you push it, it springs back. That really depends on the type of mozzarella. Not that I'm an expert in mozzarella, but I am an Italian, so I am an expert in mozzarella. Shut it. And that changes. Fior di latte, bufala, but also the typology, where you buy it, how it's produced. It's a lot of it will make variants. So I do want to see if in any of the mozzarella types that I've eaten it throughout my life and all over Italy, if it maybe gets close to one of those.
firm and falls apart, just add more hot water and it'll come back together. Columella doesn't really specify when the cheese is done, but it just took a few minutes to get it into a mass that held its shape. So at that point, it's really ready to eat.